Hi guys. Well, we're almost to the end of our distance learning experience, and this section had to do with the end of the Cold War. So hopefully you guys learned a little bit about the Cold War in these last few weeks, and this one kind of wraps it up and why it ended. Although I did see on the news today, they were talking about how relations between the United States and China are uh, kind of getting bad over the coronavirus, and they were saying that is this going to be a new Cold War between the United States and China? Okay, so we call it a Cold War because we're not actually out there fighting, and it's kind of ironic because I'm making this on Memorial Day weekend, which is when we remember all of the men and women who died fighting for our country. And so it's kind of interesting. Now, there was fighting during the Cold War, but the United States and the Soviet Union never fought each other. So that's why we call it that. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through some of these questions. Big shout out to everyone who worked so hard. And I loved getting to choose answers to put on the answer key each week. And it was very hard because you guys did such excellent work. So we'll just kind of go through these. So the first one asked, in what two European countries did the Soviets put down revolts against Soviet control? So these European countries were trying to be more democratic and have freer economies, more economies, more like the United States, where you can maybe want to open your own business or follow your own individual kind of path. And they were not allowed to do that under communism. They were told what to do. So Connor, I used your answer here, and you wrote the two European countries that the Soviets put down revolt against are Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And that is a wonderful complete sentence answer. I really, really appreciate you doing that for me, Connor, as did others as well. But this was a great example. So hopefully that made sense. It seemed like most of you guys were able to get that answer just right. The next question I borrowed from Estefania. So the question asked to name two actions or events that got in the way of détente. So remember, détente is a period of cooling. It's a French word, so it's why it sounds a little different than maybe it looks. So I really liked Estefania's answer because it always gives a little bit more context than maybe is required, but it definitely leads to a really nice complete answer. So she wrote two events or actions that got in the way of détente was when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and the Soviets were angered by U.S. support for rebels fighting against the communists in Nicaragua. So what I mean by that is, by the little extra context that she adds, is in this example is just a date. She says when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So that's just a really nice reminder for the reader who, I know that date, but when you're writing, you want to give information to whoever is reading the answer, and you also want to prove to the reader that you know the information. So I know it's right here in the text, but again, the way I have you guys answer your questions, if you were writing an essay or had to write a larger paragraph, then that might be a helpful response to put into that larger body of writing. So very nice job, Stephanie. I appreciate that. Great answer. Okay, now for some of the vocabulary. So Jairo, I usually pick, I have to say, the definitions more based on your picture, because a lot of the definitions are usually the same. You guys are probably going to Google and choosing the first one that comes up, which is totally fine. No big deal there. But I love this picture Jairo took, in part because look at the medals. That's kind of what I like it, the medals that he is wearing. So I always find that very interesting to see how leaders choose to dress, because that is a choice, right? So Jairo wrote about Nikita Khrushchev after he became the Soviet leader after Stalin's death. He led the Soviet Union during part of the Cold War as the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 1953 to 1964. So that is great. He was the second leader after Stalin. The first guy only led for a very short time, and honestly, off the top of my head, I can't think of his name right now. Wish I could, but I can't. But Stalin dies in 1953, and and Khrushchev takes over in 53. So the first guy only led for a very short time. I think Stalin died in March, so a couple of months, and then Khrushchev came to power. So thank you very much for that, Jairo. And again, I always like to see what are they wearing. Kind of interesting. So, Estefania, I stole this vocab from you, definition. Again, I love the image. I think this is so cool. So, desalinization. And if you didn't type that in correctly to your search engine, I bet you came up with desalinization, which is to take the salt out of water. And so desalinization is to take the Stalin out of the Soviet Union. So it consisted of a series of political reforms in the Soviet Union after the death of longtime dictator Joseph Stalin in 1953 and the ascension of Nikita Khrushchev to power. So remember, Stalin had gotten into power in the early 1920s. I think it was 21, 22 when he comes into power. So he had been in their power for a very, very long time. And I just think this is a really great cartoon because you've got this image of this backhoe knocking down Stalin, or knocking down, really the kind of the statues that were of Stalin. Now, this actually did come to be after the Cold War and after the Soviet Union breaks apart. They did actually take down all of the statues of Joseph Stalin. So very interesting. All right, Elijah, I stole this definition from you. Leonid Brezhnev, so first secretary of the Soviet Union. I like this image because you've got here Gerald Ford in it, and that's Gerald Ford, the left-handed a man, and actually a lot of our United States presidents are left-handers. It's kind of an interesting thing to look at percent-wise, how many are lefties. And here is Leonid Brezhnev. Oops, I went too fast. Okay, JFK, Connor. This is a very nice portrait of JFK. It's one you'll oftentimes see. So he is often referred to by his initials JFK and Jack, which is an interesting to have a nickname for John, but that is true. JFK was an American politician who served as the 35th president of the United States from January 1961 until his assassination in November 1963. And my parents were in middle school in 1963, and I remember my middle school, high school. My dad was in high school, and I remember talking to them about this, and they remember getting the news about it, and just being very, very sad. Everyone, the nation had basically a day of mourning. It was a very sad thing. So he was the youngest elected president of the United States, and he was in his early 40s. I want to say he was 41 or 43, but he was pretty darn young. And, a lot of people thought he would have been a really great president. So it's one of those things you just never know. So maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have, not quite sure. But you'll learn more about him next year in U.S. history. All right, and then Lyndon Johnson. Kobe, I used your definition. This is a photograph I actually use when I teach Lyndon Johnson in U.S. history. So again, you'll learn more about him next year. I like this photograph of him. He looks very stern. He actually was a very funny guy, and he would make people around him feel more comfortable by kind of telling jokes, sometimes inappropriate and whatnot. And he kind of wanted people to feel a little comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time, I guess, is kind of the way he worked, which I know probably doesn't make sense, but he's an interesting guy. So he was the 36th president of the United States from 63 to 69, and he was the former vice president of John F. Kennedy. So he took office upon Kennedy's death and then served. He was elected to his own term in 64, and he chose not to run for re-election in 68. He could have, but he didn't. And so he was president during most of the Vietnam War and also during the American Civil Rights Movement. So he has an interesting presidency. He also was a school teacher when he first got out of college. That was his profession, was being a teacher. So that helped shape him in his presidency, I think. All right, this picture, détente. So Kobe, again, I used your image here. I like this image. I think it's very fitting. So an easing of hostility or strained relations, especially between countries. So détente has been known mostly for the Cold War, although it is a useful term for any time there is this easing of hostility. So you may hear it in other ways. So Again, we have Leonid Brezhnev here. Notice again, he's wearing his medals. And then this is Richard Nixon, the president. And I like this because it does look like they're having a casual conversation. Both men neither look stressed. They are, of course, talking through this man who is interpreting for them. And so it's just kind of, I think it's a great photograph. I really liked it. Okay, and then Richard Nixon. And Martha, I love this illustration you chose. I have never seen this one before, so I thought this pencil drawing was actually really cool. So Richard Milhous Nixon was the 37th President of the United States between 1969 and 1974, the year in which he became the only president to resign from office. Previously, Nixon had been Vice President of the United States during Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidency. And he did resign. He would have been impeached. It was quite the scandal. You'll learn about that next year in U.S. history. I do have some newspapers in my room hanging up of his resignation. So next year, come on by and take a look at those newspapers. They were hanging up there when we left the classroom, but they're pretty darn cool. He was from California, interestingly enough. So if you ever go down to visit Disneyland, maybe go ask your parents, maybe can we swing by the Richard Nixon Library? It's pretty cool. He actually went to the same high school as my mom, and my Aunt Peggy was in high school when he became president, and she got to, in 1969, and she was in the marching band, and the marching band from Whittier High School got to go and be in his inauguration parade, which is a pretty big deal. So it's kind of a cool thing. But he's from Whittier, California. All right, and then we have SALT. And again, I love this image because it just helps convey the meaning behind this treaty. So strategic arms limitation talks. So this idea where the United States and the Soviet Union are going to limit how many nuclear weapons each country has. So that's a really big deal. And if you notice, you've got a lot of people here and they're sitting around having a conversation. So I thought that was a really nice way to kind of remember it. All right, and Elijah Ronald Reagan, another United States president. He was the 40th. Also another California president, although he ironically was born in Dixon, Illinois. So there's another Dixon. It's in the state of Illinois. But he spent most of his life in California because he was a movie actor before becoming president. Of course, he had other things along the way between those things. He was governor of California. But his presidential library is outside of Santa Barbara, California. And it's a great library. Actually, there's a big airplane there, Air Force One, the one he traveled on. They retired it after he left presidency, and they made a new one, updated one. So the old one is there. You can walk through the whole thing. It's cool. All right, and Star Wars, Kobe, this is such a cool image here. I just love this with the shield and all. I just think it's really cool. So Star Wars was the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, of President Ronald Reagan, and it was a development of outer space defense against intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. And so this was something, it was kind of going to be like a defense shield around the United States up in space. And so they termed it Star Wars because Star Wars, the first movie came out in the 1980s as well. All right, and Connor, I used your help to answer what happened in each of these years. So 1953, Nikita Khrushchev became the Soviet leader. 1956, protesters in the army overthrew the communist government of Hungary, and then the Soviets helped come back. 1968, Czechoslovakians began to reform their communist government. 1972, Nixon and Brezhnev held meetings called the SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. 79, the U.S. retreated from détente when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So things were getting a little bit better, and then they got a little worse with this invasion. And then in 1981, Ronald Reagan became president. And then, of course, the Cold War is going to end in 1989, 1990. It's going to be pretty much done. All right, you guys, I'm about out of time. I talked way too much this week. I sure do miss you. Thank you again for doing excellent work and working hard. This week's assignment is going to be a little different, so if you have questions or need any help, please let me know. But I hope you're doing well, and I sure hope that we all get to come back to school like normal in the fall so I can see you all again. So have a great rest of your week, and let me know if you need any help or have any questions. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.